my God! Oh my God!
On October 9th, residents of Florida faced an unprecedented disaster. Just 2 weeks ago, Hurricane Helene hit the state's Big Bend area as a Category 4 storm, killing at least 20 people. Now, an even more powerful storm is brewing. Monitoring from the U.S. National Hurricane Center shows that Hurricane Milton is moving toward the west coast of Florida at an alarming speed. This is the third fastest-growing hurricane on record in the Atlantic, transforming from a tropical storm to a Category 5 storm in less than 24 hours, with wind speeds as high as 165 miles per hour, about 270 kilometers per hour. Forecasters warned that the hurricane would be more destructive than anyone imagined. Milton's path leads directly to the Tampa Bay area, where more than 3 million people live. This may be the first time since 1921 that a major hurricane has directly hit the city. Experts at the National Hurricane Center believe that Milton may strengthen again before making landfall and will become an extremely dangerous Category 5 hurricane. Milton has the potential to become one of the most destructive hurricanes on record in west central Florida. Jamie Rome of the National Hurricane Center warned in the latest update. Although Hurricane Helene hit Florida in the middle of this month and caused serious damage, Milton was much more powerful. Helene was a powerful Category 4 hurricane that made landfall in the Big Bend area of Florida, killing at least 225 people. The storm's devastation spread to many southeastern states, including Florida, posing great challenges to rescue and reconstruction efforts in these areas. But in comparison, Milton is more powerful and dangerous. The Category 5 storm is moving at an alarming rate toward Florida's west coast and is expected to make landfall within the next day or two. Experts warn that it may strengthen again when it makes landfall. The biggest difference between Milton and Helene is its path of movement. Helene blew north from Florida, mainly affecting the southeastern part of the state. Milton, on the other hand, moved from west to east, hitting the Gulf Coast of southwest Florida, including the densely populated Tampa Bay area. Carrie Emanuel, a professor of meteorology at MIT, said that such a west-to-east path is very rare and tends to cause greater damage. This is the black swan worst-case scenario that experts have been fearing for years, he said. The Tampa Bay area has such a large population and is so exposed and inexperienced that this is a losing proposition. I've always thought Tampa was the city that was most concerning. As Milton approaches, large areas of Florida have been plunged into a tense atmosphere. One after another, county governments declared a state of emergency and issued mandatory evacuation orders. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, 11 counties have issued mandatory evacuation orders involving more than 5.9 million residents. Several other counties have issued voluntary evacuation orders. Tampa Mayor Jane Castor issued the sternest warning in an interview. "I can say without exaggeration that if you choose to stay in one of the evacuation zones, you will die." The city of Tampa faces unprecedented risks. Since 1921, the area has not been directly hit by a major hurricane. But as its population has exploded and climate change has exacerbated extreme weather events in recent years, the city has become more vulnerable. The population here is so large and so exposed and so inexperienced that it's a losing proposition, Professor Emanuel said. "I always thought Tampa was the most concerning city." The U.S. National Hurricane Center predicts that Milton's storm surge may be as high as 15 feet, about 4.5 meters, when it makes landfall, which will cause devastating damage to coastal areas. Combined with strong wind speeds and heavy rainfall, this storm has the potential to become one of the worst hurricane disasters ever recorded in Florida. We're assuming, and that doesn't mean it's going to happen, but we're assuming that the Port of Tampa is going to experience significant disruption, so we're operating as if their ability to receive fuel is going to be significantly disrupted, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said at a press conference. It can be seen from some details that the destructive power of Milton has far exceeded that of Hurricane Helene. Helene caused severe damage when it made landfall in the Big Bend, Florida area 2 weeks ago, but did not hit Tampa directly. But now Milton is coming, which is bound to bring devastating consequences to the city and surrounding areas. As time passes, Hurricane Milton approaches Florida faster and faster. In order to protect life safety, the authorities issued large-scale evacuation orders, requiring millions of residents to leave dangerous areas as soon as possible. However, the unprecedented evacuation operation quickly ran into serious difficulties. After being ordered to evacuate, millions of people along Florida's west coast rushed to the highways in an attempt to leave areas that were about to be hit by severe storms from Milton. However, severe traffic jams suddenly appeared on major highways and interstates, making it impossible for vehicles to leave smoothly. A lot of roads are war zones, Jack Keglow from St. Petersburg said in an interview. Even if all shoulder lanes are open, the situation is not good. According to the Florida Department of Transportation, authorities have opened emergency lanes on the interstate to facilitate the evacuation of crowds. But even with such measures, large-scale evacuation operations have still been paralyzed. Statistically, we haven't had a direct attack in 100 years, and that seems to be the case this time, Keglow said. It was supposed to take just over an hour from our home in Seminole to Orlando, but it took us 13 hours to get there. An immediate problem is that many drivers face fuel shortages. The reserves of gas stations are almost exhausted and cannot meet the needs of such a large number of vehicles. Just as the evacuation was in full swing, gas stations in Florida were experiencing fuel shortages. As of Tuesday evening, about 17.4% of gas stations across the state were out of gas, according to GasBuddy. The situation is even worse in areas facing mandatory evacuation orders. In Fort Myers on the state's Gulf Coast, 70% of gas stations were dry as of Monday night. Gas stations are filling up faster than usual, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said at a news conference. Florida Highway Patrol is escorting fuel trucks to resupply. But even so, the problem of gas stations has still become a major obstacle to the evacuation. Many residents queued up at gas stations, hoping to fill up their tanks. But many people end up being disappointed because the tanker is completely empty. Tampa resident Lindsay Carlson said her family was able to fill up on gas thanks to a gas station search app on their way to inland Lakeland. But she worries. What's really sad is that when people park their cars in front of the gas station, they find that the pump is out of gas and they don't know what to do. Others have simply given up the idea of evacuating. Ashley Helene, a resident of Holiday, Florida, said that despite the severity of the coming storm, she decided to stay where she was because she was worried that she would run out of gas on the road and be unable to return. And for those who decide to leave their homes, finding suitable accommodation becomes a major problem. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, and turning on the little bell. For the next week, we will update the latest news on hurricanes in the United States every day. As large-scale evacuation operations begin, hotels and short-term rentals along Florida's coast are almost completely booked. This is undoubtedly a big blow to those who are eager to escape the storm. Alternative accommodation in hotels or rentals is expensive and difficult to find because many hotels or rentals are full, the report said. Cities such as Dothan, Alabama, about 400 miles away from Tampa, also said local hotels could no longer accommodate more evacuees. As a result, the Atlanta Motor Speedway in Hampton, Georgia, proactively opened its campsites to hundreds of thousands of people who had evacuated their homes in Florida. The track said it had hosted evacuees during previous hurricanes Irma, Florence, and Idalia. "We have hundreds of acres of campgrounds, and opening our facilities was an easy choice to make," said Brandon Hutchison, the track's executive vice president and general manager. "If you're down the road in Milton and looking for a place to stay, we're here for you." This undoubtedly provides a glimmer of hope for those residents who have nowhere to go. But at the same time, this temporary accommodation arrangement also exposed the limitations of Florida's response to this sudden crisis. In a short period of time, millions of people were asked to evacuate, but there was a severe shortage of alternative shelter places and accommodation resources. Traffic jams, fuel shortages, and housing problems made the entire evacuation process extremely difficult. As Hurricane Milton approaches Florida's west coast, people are increasingly anxious about the impending devastating disaster. Forecasters have warned that the storm has the potential to become one of the most powerful hurricanes on record in the state. One of Milton's biggest threats is violent storm surge. The U.S. National Hurricane Center predicts that the storm may set off tsunami-like waves as high as 15 feet, about 4.5 meters, when it makes landfall. This is undoubtedly a nightmare prospect for residents of coastal areas. In fact, storm surge is not Milton's biggest threat. The hurricane could also bring heavy rainfall, with up to 15 inches, about 38 centimeters, expected. This will undoubtedly cause severe inland flooding. The storm could bring up to 15 inches of rain, said Hernando County Emergency Management Director David DiCarlo. So the impact will be severe. Residents in coastal and low-lying areas will bear the brunt. Not only do they face tsunami-like storm surges of up to 15 feet, they may also be inundated by sudden inland flooding. This is undoubtedly a huge threat to millions of people on Florida's west coast. In addition to horrific storm surge and flooding, Hurricane Milton has the potential to trigger an even more dangerous catastrophic weather event: tornadoes. It is reported that this storm may produce scattered tornadoes in multiple locations, causing serious damage to the local area. Tornado damage is possible in multiple locations, with some locations experiencing significant damage, power outages, and communications outages, the warning from the National Weather Service in Miami reads. Tornadoes themselves are extremely destructive natural disasters. Once combined with Hurricane Milton, the consequences will be disastrous. Tornadoes can not only destroy buildings, but also bring a large amount of flying objects, further exacerbating the disaster. Hurricane Helene caused huge damage in the Big Bend area of Florida, leaving a large amount of debris in the area. Now, Milton's strong winds may whip up these dangerous projectiles and turn them into deadly weapons. We're working hard to get everyone out of Milton and trying to get all of Helene's remains up, Holmes Beach Police Chief Bill Tokyer said. If you haven't evacuated today, evacuate later. You have to get out of here. In addition to deadly storm surge and flooding, as well as dangerous tornadoes and flying debris, Hurricane Milton has the potential to cause widespread power outages that can last for days. This will undoubtedly make things worse for Florida residents. According to the National Hurricane Center, Milton could cause catastrophic damage after making landfall, including power outages expected to last for days. For a modern city that relies on electricity, a long-term power outage will undoubtedly trigger a series of serious chain reactions. Hospitals and other critical infrastructure will be severely affected, and problems such as water supply interruptions and communication paralysis are likely to occur. For ordinary residents, failure to restore power supply for a long time will undoubtedly put their lives in trouble. In areas where Hurricane Helene had just hit, people had just begun to clean up the remains, and now they're facing the attack of Milton again. This will undoubtedly put many people into a situation of extreme anxiety and helplessness. It's like the Jaws theme song. It keeps coming, and it does this and that. It fills you with anxiety. Like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Said Tom Sullivan of Tampa. Emergency rescue and recovery efforts may be severely affected by ongoing power outages and communications disruptions. This will bring further trouble and disaster to residents in the disaster area. Although Florida officials have taken various measures to deal with the storm, Milton's power is too powerful to completely withstand. Residents in coastal areas are undoubtedly facing huge life dangers. Whether they can survive the violent storm is worrying. It can be said that from storm surges to floods, from tornadoes to flying objects to long-term power outages, Hurricane Milton is ready to launch a devastating attack on the west coast of Florida. Once this storm makes landfall, it will inevitably bring unprecedented disaster to this land and people's lives. For millions of Florida residents, the arrival of Hurricane Milton is undoubtedly a nightmare reality. They have still not fully recovered from the trauma caused by Hurricane Helene last month. And now, they have to face an even more powerful and unpredictable storm. This undoubtedly deepened their anxiety and panic. Just 2 weeks ago, Hurricane Helene caused devastating damage to the Big Bend region of the state, killing at least 20 people. For many people, this has been an indelible trauma. Some Florida residents are working to clear away the vast amounts of debris Helene left behind in an attempt to restore normalcy to their homes. But the progress of this work was harassed by Milton. This new hurricane has the potential to whip up these dangerous projectiles and turn them into deadly weapons. One resident posted on TikTok that she could not afford to evacuate and could only watch her family risk death. Where am I going to take 6 children for dogs and 3 adults? I can't afford it. It can be said that the scars left by Hurricane Helene not long ago have not yet completely healed, and the residents of Florida have to face an attack from nature again. This has brought constant haze and trauma to their lives. Not only is Hurricane Milton's intensity staggering, but its unusual path is also worrisome. This monster is coming from west to east, heading straight for southwest Florida. This situation was not common in the past. In fact, Tampa hasn't been hit directly by a major hurricane in more than a century. But now, this metropolis with more than 3 million residents is facing the arrival of an uninvited guest. The population here is so large and so exposed and so inexperienced that it's a losing proposition. I've always thought Tampa was the city of greatest concern, said Carrie Emanuel, a meteorology professor at MIT. Express. Unlike previous hurricanes, Milton's path and intensity were difficult to predict. This not only brings challenges to the authorities' response work, but also aggravates residents' anxiety. We've had power outages before, but not with the heavy rain and strong winds and lightning and all that Mother Nature brings, said resident Rob Townsend. It's scary when the experts really don't know. The rest of us, the novices, don't know either. Unlike previous hurricanes, Milton's approach brought unprecedented damage to millions of Florida residents. A sense of panic and uncertainty is difficult for them to prepare for the situation, which undoubtedly deepens their anxiety. Although authorities have ordered mass evacuations and asked millions of people to stay away from dangerous areas, the reality is that not everyone has the ability to do so. A Southwest Florida resident posted on TikTok that she could not afford to evacuate and could only watch her family in danger. Where am I going to take 6 kids for dogs and 3 adults? I can't afford it. Sorry. I feel like we're an easy target right now, she confided in the video. For many who were unable to evacuate, the threat posed by the storm was nothing short of chilling. They had no choice but to stay where they were and face the ravages of the storm. This not only increases the risk to life safety, but also aggravates their anxiety and panic. We have to hunker down and get through this with my 10-month-old son and my mother, said Ashley Helene of Holiday Town. Worried about running out of gas on the road and being unable to return, she ultimately decided to stay where she was. Even those who decided to evacuate faced many difficulties when embarking on the road to escape. Gas shortages and traffic jams hampered their evacuation. It was supposed to take just over an hour from our home in Seminole to Orlando, but it took us 13 hours to get there, Jack Keglow said. Gasoline is the biggest problem. All gas pumps have fuel bags on them. Although the state of Florida and the federal government have long been prepared to mobilize all forces to deal with the coming storm, they still face severe funding and manpower shortages. Last month, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas warned that the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, did not have enough funding to handle this year's hurricane season. We are meeting urgent needs with the funds we have, Mayorkas told reporters as he traveled to South Carolina. We're expecting another hurricane to come. We don't have the funding. FEMA doesn't have the funding to get through the season. However, in a short-term appropriations bill last month, Congress provided FEMA with up to $20 billion in disaster relief funding. However, President Biden again warned in a letter to Congress last week that the agency's disaster relief fund faces a shortfall at the end of the year. The funding shortage that plagues FEMA will undoubtedly become a major obstacle in responding to Hurricane Milton. Coupled with the dilemma of insufficient personnel, these may affect the efficiency of disaster relief and reconstruction efforts. The White House said the federal government is providing more than a dozen professional disaster recovery teams, including FEMA and the Coast Guard's urban search and water rescue teams. But even so, these rescue forces may still be unable to cope with the catastrophic consequences of this storm. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, and turning on the little bell. For the next week, we will update the latest news on hurricanes in the United States every day. Continue to use a scientific perspective to explore the complex truth behind meteorological events.